The Portal King just got the top wide receiver available in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's show, we dive into the Ole Miss Rebels and Lane Kiffin. They missed out on an elite cornerback prospect in Thaddeus Dixon in what kind of felt like the first real miss of this transfer portal cycle. But don't worry, Rebel fans, Ole Miss bounced back in a big way, landing top Penn State receiver Trey Wallace. With Wallace joining Deshaun Stribling, the wide receiver core is shaping up to be a real strength of this team as the offense comes together. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. For your second listen, check out Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy for other perspectives on the SEC and college football. Heck, even Ole Miss. You won't want to miss it. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes every NFL dollar playoffs feel more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started right now. All right, so Ole Miss missed out on Thaddeus Dixon over the weekend. He's a cornerback prospect that is going to North Carolina. We talked last week about how the last day for late registration for North Carolina was on Wednesday. So how could Thaddeus Dixon end up there? And either one or two things are happening in this situation. Either he committed before Wednesday and they actually registered and just didn't put him in the student directory to save his commitment until the graphic got made, or there's academic shenanigans going on in North Carolina, and North Carolina is known for doing academic shenanigans. Either way, Thaddeus Dixon is going to North Carolina, and Ole Miss fans are like, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? Well, Ole Miss got a commitment from Trey Wallace, a wide receiver out of Penn State. He was the top available transfer portal wide receiver. He's 6'1", 200 pounds. Like I said, out of Penn State, he was the leading wide receiver on the team. Now, Tyler Warren, the tight end, was actually the leading pass catcher for the Nittany Lions. But if you looked at wide receivers, Trey Wallace was the alpha male there. He had 46 catches, 720 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And this was with a quarterback that is, let's just say, challenged. Drew Allar was somebody that every big game, seemingly, the wide receivers just went away for Penn State. This happened last year. This happened this year. It just happened. It happened against Notre Dame. Whenever Penn State needed something, Drew Allar couldn't do it. So these numbers with Drew Allar being on the field is actually quite interesting to see. I actually don't blame Trey Wallace for wanting to get out of there. Looking at the way he graded over his time at Penn State, he ended up 73 graded this year. He was in the green, his highest rated year before his senior campaign. And the zones looking at right now, you can see he's not a deep threat. Penn State did not throw the ball to the wide receivers down the field. They just didn't do that. He had one catch for 18 yards and a touchdown on the left side. He had one catch for 25 yards in the middle, and that was it. He was 1 for 4 and 1 for 5. He was targeted 9 times, over 20 yards downfield, had 2 catches. Where he made his bones as a wide receiver is being a contested catch maker, and specifically in the right and the middle zones. If you want to look at that middle square of the tic-tac-toe board, over 10 yards, but under 20 yards downfield in the middle between the numbers, 11 catches on 14 targets, 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a perfect NFL passer rating. That area lets you know that he is very good in the middle of the field and a nice contested catch maker. On the right side, in that same quadrant, same area of the field, 7 catches on 9 targets, 114 yards. An interception resulted on targeting him on that side. The NFL passer rating 79.2. And, of course, near the line of scrimmage in the middle of the field, 20 of 26 of 0 to 10 yards, 194 yards. They did a very good job of attacking him down the field up to about 20 yards. Nothing deep. He's not a deep threat. He's a contested catch maker. And think of it like this. In a lot of ways, he is used the way that Juice Wells should have been used. Now, if Ole Miss decided to take Trey Wallace next year and turn him into a deep threat like DK Metcalf, like they used Juice Wells over the course of the season, that would be at least a little bit problematic. But the stats do not bear that out. He does his work in the middle of the field, in between the numbers, and is a nice contested catch maker. And if Ole Miss can use that along with their tight ends, the way they like to do switch releases and things like that, they have a chance to make the wide receiver position interesting. Now, looking at the wide receivers that Ole Miss brought in, they have to replace Juice Wells. They have to replace Trey Harris. Trey Harris is potentially the best wide receiver in all of college football. The first transfer portal player that they brought in was Deshaun Stribling. Even though Oklahoma State was extremely behind the eight ball this season at quarterback, he still managed 52 catches, 882 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He is originally from Hawaii. He is originally a transfer from Washington State. And this is a guy that is going to be counted on to be that number one type wide receiver. And then when you look at Trey Wallace, 46 catches, 720 yards, 4 touchdowns, that's the other side. I think those are your two outside wide receivers this season for Ole Miss. Nothing too crazy, but looking at the wide receiver unit, and you see the zones one more time in the middle of the field, 11 catches on 14 targets, over 10 yards, 20 catches on 26 targets, below 10 yards between the numbers. He had 31 catches between the numbers. So that's worth at least paying attention to. He's a good player. They're all good players. And when you look at the wide receiver room, at the slot position, you have Caden Lee, who is going to kind of have a chance to be a star this season. He was one of the alpha dogs for Ole Miss last season. You've got Deshaun Stribling. You've got now Trey Wallace. And you got 3 essential one-and-done type wide receivers that look like they're going to be the top shelf, the top crust of the Ole Miss wide receiver room. They're playing over Caleb Cunningham, who is not a spring enrollee. He is not going to be here until the summer. He might be a little bit behind the 8 ball going into the fall season. But then you have Winston Watkins. We'll talk about him in the next segment. An absolute baller, somebody that is perfectly situated to be the slot wide receiver for Ole Miss. He's a cousin of Sammy Watkins, the former number 3 draft pick in the entire draft. You have Samari Reed, who is going to be here. You have Dylan Alford. This Ole Miss wide receiver unit this year kind of feels like a really talented bridge unit to get to this next group that is coming in, whether it's Winston Watkins or Caleb Cunningham or any of those guys as well. We'll see exactly how it goes, but those 3 wide receivers that Ole Miss has coming in at that top level, the Trey Wallace, the Deshaun Stribling, the Caden Lee, they're in really good shape. And when you look at the tight ends that Ole Miss also has for what they can do, Luke Haas, 26 catches, 324 yards, 4 touchdowns. Caleb Odom brought in the transfer portal. He's going to be a wide receiver, somebody to look at as one of the outside guys. 7 catches, 65 yards. Daquan Wright, who had a major star turn in the Gator Bowl, 27 catches, 394 yards, 4 touchdowns for him as well. And Ole Miss even added Trace Bruckler, the tight end out of New Mexico, 22 catches, 138 yards, and 2 touchdowns this season. Ole Miss's offense, as it sits right now in 2025, it's going to justify Ole Miss being the 8th best betting favorite for the national championship by FanDuel. It wasn't me that put them as the 8th best betting favorite. It was FanDuel, and this offense will be the dominant part of this team, and the wide receivers looks to be a leading component of it with the players that are coming in. It's really interesting to see in exactly how it's going to go, but this Ole Miss football team is going to be more offensive loaded in this year than they were this season, to where the defense kind of carried the water a little bit. We'll talk about that as the season gets a little bit closer to everybody, tuning in. So Winnie Watkins put on a show Friday night at the Polynesian Bowl, and right now Austin Simmons is just the quarterback for the Ole Miss Rebels. What does that all mean? Stick around. We'll break it all down next. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply make a pick, more or less, in at least two players. If your picks hit, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For me, I'm all about the hot takes this season. I was on Lamar Jackson to throw more than 250 yards and Travis Kelce to have more than 70 yards receiving. It's fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. So ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. So an interesting little piece of news happened this weekend. I think the first baseball roster was released, and I think it was Tyler Comas of 24/7 was really quick to break this news, and that is Austin Simmons is just going to be the Ole Miss quarterback. He has put his baseball career on pause to maximize being the quarterback. Now, I think the article said he put his baseball career to rest to just concentrate on football. I do not believe that to be 100% accurate. I think he put his Ole Miss baseball career to rest. I think you're going to have a situation in July to where Austin Simmons gets drafted. He's a left-handed pitcher that throws the ball 95 miles an hour. Somebody will take a flyer on that, hold his rights, and depending on what happens in football, baseball is still an option for Austin Simmons. Austin Simmons, though, has a chance to be the dude at quarterback this season. He just does. Completely locked in. He's done a heck of a job recruiting and putting this roster together. If you look at last season, he was 19-32, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, and led the drive against Georgia that kind of settled that game down. Everybody expected Austin Simmons to be the dude. Honestly, nobody expected him to play baseball this year. Nobody that wasn't just a real baseball fan that was just hoping that he played baseball. The moment he tweaked his arm last year, and with the quarterback position potentially being his this fall, and with Ole Miss recruiting basically no real quarterbacks, they picked up a couple of guys late, but, AJ Maddox and those guys, they're going to be competing for the backup. It's really Austin Simmons' job, but Austin Simmons concentrating on quarterback, that means Pierce Clarkson and AJ Maddox, he's going to be able to compete with them from the very beginning, and there's not a chance to where one of those two guys kind of slip up on him a little bit as well. So anybody that was looking forward to seeing Austin Simmons pitch this year, that is not going to happen. Now, one thing that Austin Simmons is doing this year is recruiting his butt off. And a lot of the players that he is recruiting is from the state of Florida as far as high school kids. If people want to remember about it, this 2025 class, this was supposed to be his graduating class. So whenever he did the camp circuit, the 7-on-7 circuit, all of that stuff in the state of Florida, he met people from this class. And one of the players that he met in this class was Winnie Watkins. And Winnie Watkins is from Venice, Florida, Venice High School. He was one of the top performers in the Polynesian Bowl in Hawaii over the weekend. He had 2 touchdowns in that game. Looked like a perfect slot wide receiver, and he absolutely just kind of dominated the proceedings. And he is the cousin of Sammy Watkins, who was the former number 3 draft pick, and he is the heir apparent to Caden Lee. He is going to be my pick of any freshman wide receiver that gets on the field this season. I think you're going to see a lot of him. I think he has a chance to be the designated punt returner this season. I do not think he is big enough to be the kickoff returner, but he certainly is athletic enough to handle that as well. But him returning punts, him getting some work in the slot. He obviously is from South Florida, just like Austin Simmons, just like Samari Reed, just like those guys in the program. They get to Oxford, Mississippi, and do all that. Winnie Watkins looks to be the alpha dog of this class, and I'll be really interested to see what he does whenever he arrives in Oxford, Mississippi. You know, you look at the wide receivers that have been committed. We talked about the transfer portal wide receivers in the first segment. They added Deshaun Stribling, they added Trey Wallace, and the cornucopia basically of tight ends that they added to that room. The rumor is, and this is still just a rumor, but you hear people talking, there's a tweak coming to the offense this season. It will not be as much RPO based, whatever you want to take that to mean. It's going to look a little bit more pro style, a little bit more pro concepts that can be added to what is going on. Now, this is a Lane Kiffin offense, so the Lane Kiffin shot play, those things, they are going to happen. Those aren't going anywhere. Tempo is not going anywhere. What's going somewhere is they're going to match up a little bit more. And they're going to be able to do things from game to game that's a little bit different and make it to where their team can go to 12, 13, and 11 personnel as far as how the offense runs without changing the personnel. And they do have the people to do that right now. We'll see. I think that Lane Kiffin has a chance this season to reinvent a little bit Ole Miss in a good way. I mean, the offense for Ole Miss, they were like number 1 in the country last year. They were not bad at all. They had struggles in the red zone and they had struggles running the football. I think there's going to be tweaks that make those things a little bit better. Defenses have figured out that on 4th and short and Ole Miss is running tempo, they know exactly which play is running because each and every time it's an inside zone play. Every time. You know exactly how to get to the running back. Ole Miss isn't running outside zone. Their running game has become predictable. And I think they're going to match up and figure out ways to make that a little bit more unpredictable. Between Logan Diggs and Shakai Mills-Knight and Kejuan Lacey and those guys playing in the backfield, there's other running backs that you hear are mentioned with Ole Miss as well. We'll see exactly how it goes. But I think this offense has a chance to really evolve into the next level. Like I said, tempo is not going anywhere. It's just not, because it's too much of a weapon for what they do. And with the speaker in the helmet, you can go just as fast of what you're doing and still let instructions be known of what the defense is doing real quick. Get to the line of scrimmage at multiple seconds before the microphone gets cut off, and you have the offensive coordinator in the booth letting you know what the coverage looks like. It's a little bit of a cheat code, but the defense has that as well. So if you're going quick, they have an idea of being able to radio down. It's like, hey, they're up to the line of scrimmage in a hurry. They're going to run inside zone, and they're setting that up to where the defense can attack that. I think you're going to see Ole Miss run tempo, but they're also going to slow it down from time to time. Whenever they need to make a play, they're going to get past the point that microphones can be still on. They're going to make it as quickly as possible. I don't think you're going to see Ole Miss going for it on 4th down at tempo like they did. Like they asked Jordan Watkins multiple times to block an SEC level defensive end. I just don't think that is going to happen in 2025. I do think that it's setting up to be a little bit different, but it's going to be just as explosive, if that makes sense to everybody. We'll see what's going on there. Anyway, in the final segment of the day, we're diving into an overtime classic as Ole Miss fell to Mississippi State in a game that started as a nightmare for Ole Miss. Ole Miss clawed back in. How did they battle back, and what went wrong at the end? Stick around. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets whenever you win that first $5 bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and a variety of bets helps keep the game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the game, FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So let's turn our attention real quick to the basketball game that was played on Saturday between Ole Miss and State. It was a fantastic ball game. This was the first game between two ranked programs, between Ole Miss and State, where both of them were ranked in the AP poll in their history. And the game played out that way. It was one of the most exciting, greatest basketball games that has ever been played in the state of Mississippi. There's been others that have been quite good. I'm not saying it's the best, but it is way up the list as far as being good in a high stakes, high intensity game. That is the way that game unfolded. And when you look at the stats in this game, Ole Miss lost the game 84-81. Jamin Brakefield missed a three as time expired that would have tied the game. Ole Miss shot 45.5%, State 44.6%. Ole Miss was 13 of 35 from three. State was 9 of 27. Ole Miss had 10 turnovers, State 15. This is what cost Ole Miss the ball game. Rebounding, Mississippi State had 51. Ole Miss had 29. And the fouls were at 21 and 13 in this game. Jamin Brakefield had 20 points in the game, shot very well from the outside. It was kind of his day. And honestly, this game started out as bad as any game could start out for a team that you were rooting for. You were playing on the road in Humphrey Coliseum against a desperate team. And I don't mean desperate team in a bad way, but if Mississippi State would have lost that game, they had a road trip coming up on Tuesday or Wednesday in Knoxville against Tennessee. It easily could have been a 4-game losing streak for the Mississippi State Bulldogs, and it's not like they've played badly. But this is what I mean. It was a desperate team to prevent that from happening, and Mississippi State came out early with the crowd being absolutely electric. Humphrey Coliseum was absolutely jacked up for this game. They jumped out to a 14-2 lead before Ole Miss could even excel. Before you even had an idea of what was going on, they jumped out to a 14-2 lead. And Ole Miss tried to start off. They didn't start off in the first 8 or so minutes very well. Mississippi State in the first half would lead by as much as 14 points. The last couple of minutes of the half, Ole Miss kind of started to get control of the proceedings. They had a couple of three-point shots, ended up down by 8 points at the break. The second half, Ole Miss was the better team, forcing an overtime an overtime period at the end of the game. But it was a situation in this game. Got to give State credit for this. Ole Miss would get it down to 1 point. Mississippi State would go on a mini run, 6 or 7 points. And that happened 3 or 4 times in the second half. Ole Miss had a 3 basically at the buzzer at the end of the second half to push into overtime. Once it got to overtime, Ole Miss took its first lead of the ball game in that overtime. And they had what seemingly was control of the proceedings in overtime. They were kind of running things. But then the play of the game happened for Mississippi State, and it was probably the game-winning play for the Bulldogs. And it was a scrum in the middle of the floor, got flipped up to, I think, Padula, who got it to Matthew Morrell, who had an easy layup in there. That layup got blocked by Mississippi State, rebounded by Mississippi State. They threw it up the floor quickly in what looked like it was going to be an alley-oop. Cameron Matthews got it out in the wing to a three-point shooter. He nailed a three-point shot. Mississippi State took the lead, I think either by 1 or 2, and they never relinquished it from that point. That was what the game turned on. That was the game. As bad as Ole Miss started, as bad as they got out-rebounded, it was one singular play that Mississippi State made is the reason that they won this basketball game and the reason that Ole Miss did not win it. If Ole Miss can play as badly as they played at the beginning of this game and still have a legit chance to win on the road at a top 20 level opponent, that is a very good sign for Chris Beard's team. The fight back that they had in this game, the fact that they just would not concede to the fact that it just wasn't their night, is going to be a hallmark that all Ole Miss fans can kind of look back on and say, hey, I can kind of take solace in all of this. I'm actually more excited after this Mississippi State game than I was after Ole Miss won the game at Coleman Coliseum against Alabama in a loss against your hated rival. But if you just look at the game and what happened and kind of take the micro wins from the basketball game, Ole Miss did the little things to get back in that game and almost came all the way back. Honestly, you're one reverse layup or dunk away from coming all the way back. Because if Ole Miss scores there, if Matthew Morrell makes that layup, I don't think Mississippi State comes back. I don't. It was that block shot. It was the Cameron Matthews pass out on the wing for the wide open three that gave Mississippi State the lead. That place became electric and it became really hard for the Bulldogs. Now, the rematch is going to be happening in a couple of weeks in Oxford, Mississippi, and it's going to be fantastic. If that game is anything like this one, it's going to be fantastic. So we'll see exactly how it goes. One thing that I am concerned of in this game, and we talked about that during the week, is Malik Dia. Whenever teams work to take Malik Dia out of the game, when he becomes the number one option to kind of take away, who is the number 2? Against Mississippi State, once it got going, it was Jamin Brakefield. Padula, he had some moments. He tried to be that guy. Had a couple of ill-advised shots in there as well. Juju Murray tried to be that guy a little bit. So we'll see who can be the player that can replace Malik Dia when the other team just decides that this guy is not going to beat us. He did have a thunderous jam and a couple of three-point shots in this game. It's not like Malik Dia played really poorly, but in the second half of the game, Chris Beard kind of had him sitting on the bench because of the way that Ole Miss was playing, and he didn't necessarily like what he was seeing from Malik Dia, I think he said. We'll see exactly how it goes, but Ole Miss goes down to Humphrey Coliseum in Starkville and loses the game, but it is a situation that Ole Miss can kind of take a little bit of solace moving forward against the game this week against Texas A&M and against Missouri. Missouri, only 3 losses on the season, very good basketball program. I think they have a win over Kansas. It's going to be a game in Columbia. But if Ole Miss can play as well as they've been playing in the totality on the road, I don't know how bad I feel about the game in Missouri. And then you have the home game against a top 10 Texas A&M Aggies team in the course of this week. So thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves in offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number 1 Ole Miss podcast out there. Thank you for making us the Ole Miss Morning Show. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in all of college sports. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word meaning bad football. We'll see you later.